We're coming now towards the end of our series of sermons on Jesus' most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, as we enter chapter 7 of Matthew's Gospel. At first, these verses, which Karis just read, might seem a little disjointed after the flowing prose of chapters 5 and 6. But in fact, all of these deal with relationships. Our relationships with our brothers and sisters, our relationships with God, and our relationship with the whole world. Richard Glover, who wrote a commentary on Matthew's Gospel, brings these verses together under three headings. He says they contain a grievous fault, a neglected privilege, and a forgotten duty. And that's how we'll deal with them. So first of all, a grievous fault. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way as you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. You know, there are some people who take pride in being judgmental. They say, I call a spade a spade. They use what they claim to be honesty as a cover for rudeness. That's part of what Jesus condemns here. Ironically, it's a condemnatory attitude that Jesus is speaking out. Why? Well, apart from the hurt, he goes on, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Now, some people have suggested that Jesus didn't have a sense of humor or that Jesus didn't ever laugh. There is no recorded instance when Jesus laughed, that is true. And they point to the description of him in Isaiah as being a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and they suggested that Jesus never had fun, the implication being that neither should we. Now, even if one ignores the fact that children clearly loved him, which they wouldn't do if he wasn't good to be with, which means that he must have been fun, and that people kept inviting him as the guest of honour at dinner parties, read through Luke's Gospel. There's one dinner party after another, which they surely wouldn't have invited Jesus if he hadn't been good company. This passage, with its obvious absurdity, should make it clear that Jesus is telling a joke. And he would have had people laughing at the absurdity of a man with a plank sticking out of his face trying to take a piece of sawdust out of somebody else's eye. Richard Glover observes that fault finders frequently have the very fault which they rebuke. He comments, you can always tell a man's weaknesses by noting his antipathies. The proud feel others' pride, presuming and competitive. The hard man in a bargain thinks his neighbour doesn't yield enough to him. The untrue cannot trust and believe all men liars. The wasps complain of other people's stings, and the quarrelsome lament that other people will not let them be at peace. Your form of fault may differ from the form that offends you, but in substance, you have the faults that you dislike. Jesus says that if you must correct the fault of others, first correct yourself, and then, if you must correct them, do it by your example of lowliness and prayerfulness. And then we come to verse 6. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. At first glance, the meaning is obvious. You don't throw the sacred bread of the temple to the dogs. I have to say here that dogs in the New Testament sense is didn't have such a positive view of doggies as we do in the United Kingdom. These were the disease-ridden, semi-wild dogs of the rubbish heap. So you wouldn't throw sacred bread to those kind of dogs. Nor would you throw pearls to any animal, but especially not to pigs, the uncleanest of animals. Okay, but how do we apply this today? First, this makes it clear that what verses 1 to 5 mean when they talk about not judging means that you're not to suspend all critical judgments, because otherwise how could we remotely put this into practice? Elsewhere, Jesus said that by a person's fruits you would know them. And you can't know that, judge somebody by their fruits, without using some kind of critical judgment. It comes back to the fact that it's the condemnatory angle that Jesus is condemning, not using our critical attributes. So it must be about not continuing to present the gospel to people who have in some way consistently turned their back on it. John Stott, when he writes on the Sermon on the Mount, urges us to caution in applying this passage. I would also, for what is worth, concur with John Stott. I'm not sure there's anybody who's really worried about whether I agree with John Stott or not, but for what it's worth, there it is. There's only one time when I feel that I've put this into practice. And to my embarrassment, a couple of months later, the person concerned became a Christian. So much for my judgment. But even John Stott, as a highly experienced pastor, says, at the same time, to give people up is a very serious step to take. I can think of only one or two occasions in my experience when I felt it was right. This teaching of Jesus is for exceptional situations only. Our normal Christian duty is to be patient and persevere with others, as God has patiently persevered with us. So we come to a neglected privilege, prayer. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds. And to the one who knocks the door will be opened. We're encouraged to be persistent in prayer. Richard Glover says it's an action so high it is a marvel that any should practice it. But we are invited to take part in prayer. Jesus really wants to hear from us. We're encouraged to ask, to seek, and to knock. But the sense of the passage is that not that we shouldn't do it just once, but that we should keep on asking, keep on seeking, keep on knocking. In other words, not to give up, but to persevere. Not because God is reluctant to answer us, but because he is our heavenly Father. And Jesus goes on to say, which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? A rounded stone might look a bit like a bread roll. The common eel-like catfish of Galilee would look rather like a snake. But no loving father would give either to a son who is hungry and asks for food, Even though Jesus says they are evil, he has no rose-tinted spectacles. He knows that within the heart of each one of us is something that is rotten. He has no illusions about human nature. Of course, in prayer, we may not always get what we want. It's been said many times before, God's answers to our prayers are rather like a traffic light. Sometimes he says, yes, which is like the green light, go. Sometimes he says, wait a bit, which is like the amber. And sometimes he will say no, which is like the red light. Even the great apostle Paul didn't get everything that he wanted in prayer. He records in his second letter to the Corinthians, I was given a thorn in the flesh. We don't know what. We'd love to know. But maybe it's just as well we don't, because then it can apply to anything. I was given a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And that brought Paul to the conclusion, therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. C.S. Lewis, in his book, The Problem of Pain, says that there are moments when God gives a rather special sort of answer to prayer. It's not the locked door. It's more like a silent, certainly not uncompassionate gaze. As though he shook his head, not in refusal, but waving the question, like, peace, child, you don't understand. As we've already been told several times in this Sermon on the Mount, God is our loving Heavenly Father, and we can put our trust in him. So finally, a forgotten duty. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. Verse 12, therefore, brings a summary of Jesus' ethics. Because God has been so wonderfully kind to us, so we should be kind to others. It's often referred to as the golden rule, and something similar crops up in other religions. But quite often, it's in the negative form. Don't do to others what you wouldn't want them to do to you. Jesus instead says that we should do to others that which we would want them to do to us. It's very similar, but it's so much more positive. And what does it mean? Well, it should be in every aspect of our life. I remember one year at the Keswick Convention, in the final session, the speaker said that most of us would have some kind of opportunity to practice this the following day, because we will be driving many miles home, because it would be the end of our holidays. And sure enough, the next day we were planning on driving back from Keswick to Plymouth. And he said, will you drive with loving kindness? And that stuck in my brain. Now, I can't honestly say that I always do succeed in driving with loving kindness. But it's an aim. It's a goal. It's something which I remember as I drive around the city, and one day I'll be driving further than that. Am I driving with loving kindness? But that should apply to every aspect of our lives. So we come to the end of this passage about our relationships. At the centre must be God himself. And as we look outwards to others, we should mirror his attitude to us by giving to others as we would hope that they would treat us.